Well, welcome everyone. My name is Sharon Rossmark, CEO of Women in Drones. I have the honor of moderating our roundtable conversation on the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the electric, VTOL, and advanced air mobility sectors of aviation. Joining me this morning are several colleagues representing various segments of the industry. Before we dive into our conversation, I'd like to have each of our panelists take a moment to introduce themselves. And based on my screen, Mr. Huffman, we will start with you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Once again, I'm Ernest Huffman. I'm a program manager here at North Central Texas Council of Governments, and I manage the aviation planning and education program areas. My primary responsibilities are surface transportation planning in and around all of our aviation facilities. We got close to 400 different types of facilities in the region, but also I manage the different relationships in the aviation region here in the North Texas area. So you got aerospace manufacturing, drone integration, advanced air mobility, aviation related education, supply chain, anything you can think of in terms of aviation in North Texas. We got our hands in North Central Texas Council of Governments, and that's what we're doing. Thank you, Sharon.
Great, thank you. Russell, can you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. I'm here in Dallas with Ernest, who's a colleague of mine. Always good to be with you, Sharon. I'm the CEO of Texas UAS Works. Texas UAS Works, a nonprofit aerospace research and integration firm. We are focused primarily on automation as well as eVTOL development. Mostly in the military and public safety sectors.
Great, thank you. Anita, you're up next.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anita Sengupta. I'm the CEO and founder of Hydroplane Limited. We're a sustainable aviation technology company based in Los Angeles, California, in the North Desert region, and we're working to develop power plant technology to decarbonize aviation, starting with small planes first. My role as CEO is to do lots of fundraising, business development, partnerships, and to lead the overall company day-to-day operations. As we grow, I will be able to hire additional people to offload some of those operational duties, but I do have an amazing team of engineers who work for me. I'm also a professor at the University of Southern California in the Astronautical Engineering Department, and this is a great time to be a person entering the aviation sector because of the new technologies that are out there, new forms of transport like advanced air mobility and urban air mobility, and so many new technologies that are finding synergies from energy storage to actually implementing them into ground-based vehicles and aerial vehicles. So happy to be on the panel today.
Thank you. And Bill, please introduce yourself.
Hi there. Thanks, Sharon. Bill Johnson. I'm the president and co-founder for Air Advisory. We're a consultancy in the advanced air mobility market, focused on that market, looking to support any players, participants in that market, in the sense that we would provide expertise and analysis of areas in a company, or for those that would be wanting to support through financial or insurance or second tier supply into the market. So that's where we sit. Thanks.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Ricky.
First off, thank you for having me on the panel. Although I'm relatively new to the aerospace and the eVTOL industry, I'm definitely not new to the diversity, equity, and inclusion spaces. I've served close to 30 years in HR for some best-in-class organizations in consumer goods, med tech, high tech. And the conversation we're going to have is a personal passion of mine. So as the Chief People Officer for Whisk Aero, I'm excited to be a part of this discussion. And again, Whisk Aero is a joint venture between Boeing and Kitty Hawk. So we are off and running, at this point.
Great. Well, thank you all. So let me just kind of set up a framework for our conversation, and particularly for our audience. With the talent shortages popping up in every industry and no company being immune to the Great Resignation, the widening the scope of recruiting makes more sense than ever before. However, in aviation, we have the opportunity as an industry to really affect change, because in many ways, with eVTOLs and advanced air mobility being the fastest growing sectors within aviation, we are building a new industry. And we are in a perfect position to build this new industry with diversity, equity, and inclusion as a foundational component of that framework. And over the coming years, the industry is bringing thousands of new jobs across all sectors. With the current talent crisis and the workforce demanding change, the industry needs to take new approaches to its hiring practices and talent development. So with that as our backdrop, let's hear from our panelists. So our first question, and Ernest, I'm just going to tee this up right to you. Paint a picture of the talent crisis in the industry that the industry is facing and how it's affecting the acceleration of vertical flight. Can you start us off with that, please?
Absolutely. And Sharon, you made a poignant point when you started out your conversation. You said every industry is having workforce shortages. That's not something that's special to the aerospace and aviation industries. So the primary concern is, and this was something previous that was a problem even before COVID. I work in aviation education outreach, so I'm in schools all the time trying to get kids interested in aviation related careers. And the overall gist of it is we're competing. Our jobs are competing with every job out there. The fortunate thing and aspect of being in America is we have millions and millions of jobs out there that we can choose from, millions of different opportunities we have an opportunity to choose from that really almost every American citizen can take advantage of. And when you get into schools and you get into colleges and universities, we're all competing with all of that IP. So the best thing for us to do, in particular in this space, in the emerging technologies around aviation, we all need to get in front of kids earlier. We need, because we're competing with all those other industries, entertainment, legal, information systems, IT, everything out there, web services. Being a STEM field, that's nothing new. Competing with folks to get employment, we just got to go harder. Thank you, Sharon.
Yeah. Anyone else want to chime in on that question?
Yeah, I can, from my background with the aerospace defense industry, I was with Northrop Grumman for 13 years, and they are seeing this huge hit and have a huge push towards hiring. So I absolutely agree, Ernest. It is not solely an aerospace problem, but it is because of the engineering talent that's needed to go into these. I think that you do have a bit of a focus, but when you're talking about this broader, the ecosystem that is advanced air mobility, you have many different talents that you need. And so you need all of that. And there is this lack of talent throughout, and it's being pulled from so many different ways. As the economy grows and maybe as it shrinks, we may see a little bit of a change to this aspect, but I think that it's still, the economy that we have in the United States at least is vibrant enough that it's always going to be an issue that you need manpower, and that other things are going to be pulling it in different ways.
That's a great point. And I don't know if any other panelists wanted to chime in on that. But if not, Ernest, okay, Ernest, go ahead.
Yeah, let me hop back in. And I don't know if you were leading to this, Sharon, but the tremendous opportunity here, though, is now if we can market these jobs to the underserved communities, which are traditionally underserved in every sector in terms of marketing. And there's another thing that I've been seeing lacking. So you see a lot of programs now instituted to get young girls interested in STEM related careers. The stuff for boys, young boys, are starting to fall along the wayside. I don't see a lot more. I don't see enough of the stuff for boys, in particular, young boys in minority communities who lack access to opportunity. So I think from an industry perspective, there's millions of kids in homes and urban areas and urban centers that can take advantage of these industries. We got to market to those folks now, like we've never done before.
Absolutely. And in fact, building upon that point, from an HR perspective, since this is our primary audience, it really says that the organization that they're representing needs to do more than just look at hiring. They need to start working on filling the pipeline by investing some of those dollars in terms of into communities that allows them to start fueling that pipeline towards their organization, but towards the industry as a whole.
Yeah, and I would chime back in that there's, when you say underserviced, Ernest, I think of it as a huge talent pool that has not yet been tapped. And so the HR folks need to start looking at where is their population, if nothing else. to your point, Sharon, you then need to educate that population so that it can actually have, the foundational talents and background that it needs to be successful in whatever it's going to be drawing into. But I think that we are missing, just as we missed for how many years, 50% of the population when women were, held back in so many areas. We now are missing how much of the population because they don't have the opportunity. They've been underserved, as you said, Ernest. So I think that's the step that HR needs to start to consider in their job.
Great point.
The industry is suffering from, whether intentional or not, from the fact that it's over the years has been viewed as exclusive. And, the great thing about the emergence of AAM is it presents an opportunity to bring in non-traditional folk into the industry. That it's not just aerospace, other companion technologies that have to be evolved along with it.
Great point. Great point.
So Sharon, I'd like to just make a comment as we're talking about like where we are today as it relates to the industry. I mean, and I think we were talking, like I heard someone mention the exclusiveness, of it and whatnot. And this is probably considered when we were growing up, probably like one of those good jobs. You get a job in the aerospace industry, you do this, that, and the other, you stay at that job forever. But the real issue is if you're not invited, to the party, you can't dance, right? Like if you don't see people who look like you, you don't even think it's possible, right? So now that we have this industry and it's starting to blow up, like those issues that we had in the past with inviting everyone to the dance are now starting to avail themselves even more because we're just so far behind, right? So if we're talking about where we are today, it's no different, right? I mean, it's, we're talking about an aerospace industry that has traditionally been 80%, men and 20% women. So again, there is a huge opportunity for us to just change the paradigm. And because we haven't done it, it's not really in our DNA. We got to figure it out, at this point, right? So I think I heard Ernest talking about it, Russell, Bill, like everyone's talking about what we, kind of the state, of play, here and what we kind of need to do moving forward. And I do think that we're no different. So as we're talking about introducing this at an early age, I think we're going to get into this, into this discussion, but I mean, there's a huge, huge opportunity for us to just kind of change the paradigm here, especially with this being so new. I don't think we really have excuses like maybe we did when we were coming up looking for jobs and figuring out what we wanted to study. We have an opportunity to kind of change the game right now.
Ricky, you bring up a number of great points, as did the others. And for me, what resonates through all of the conversation is that this is really a conversation about leadership. Because whether you're talking about having an invitation to the party, for me, it's about a seat at the table. Mm-hmm. And it really it starts at the top of your organization, right? And so whether it's the CEO or even higher, which is the board of directors, it really needs to be owned there. So I think we all might agree that there's a huge opportunity. Anita, I'm sure you want to jump in here. What would you like to add to the conversation?
Yeah, so I think there's an interesting social opportunity that exists now, which probably hasn't existed before, which is that in popular culture, now being part of aerospace, being part of the science sector, being a geek is now considered to be acceptable and a cool thing. But what we're not seeing is a translation of that popular culture, which exists in different media forms, whether that's on TV, streaming content, movies, popular figures, and coupling that to actual career choices. And so one of the things I do is a lot of science communication where I actually go out and talk to the general public. I actually speak at science fiction conventions. And so you have this massive group of young people who are so interested in space, for example, but they're still not viewing it as a career choice because they don't understand what the career options are. And so I think that is another huge opportunity which has never existed before that really needs to be tapped into. And it's meaning it's not just the responsibilities of our companies, it's also the responsibility of different forms of media to integrate that into their content. And it's just a fascinating paradigm shift that I haven't seen as a lifelong science fiction fan, it's become mainstream and popular to be a geek.
So true. I totally agree. Well, before we move on to the next topic, any last comments on this one? No? Okay, great. So let's take a step back and let's look at the bigger picture. What, many people confuse diversity and inclusion. They don't understand what equity means. In fact, most of the time equity is left out, is usually just diversity and inclusion. I'd like to hear from one of the panelists to start us off on what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you? Anita, you want to start us off?
Well, so I think, me specifically as a woman and a woman of color who's, worked for 20 years in the sector, I always look around the room and oftentimes I'm the only person there, from both of those perspectives, which I think is pretty unfortunate. So for me, definitely what it means is that the room is going to become completely diverse, representative of our global society, representative of our different genders and our ethnicities in the United States. And so that really has to come from a hiring perspective, both, entry level positions, as well as from a leadership perspective. And I don't just mean managers, I also mean C-suite. And so there has to be a metric which is applied at the corporate level that we want to see gender equity, ethnic equity, different background equity in the hiring process from the top down as a means of the company being successful. But for me as an individual, it means feeling as though I am part of a group of people who are also like me.
Gotcha. Anyone else want to share a perspective on what diversity, equity, inclusion means?
Yeah, having spent 22 years in the Army, let me tell you, you will be surprised at where great ideas come from. And, there were so many times where, the lowliest private, standing in the back of the formation would have the most brilliant idea. And, for us at Texas UAS Works, we fashion ourselves as innovators. And we tend to look at things very laterally, and so having that diversity of experience, the diversity of thought, really moves the ball forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Others want to chime in?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I mean, I'll add this. I mean, I think that everything that Anita and Russell spoke about is so true. And I just think about, again, we're talking about most of us are STEM kids, right? You grew up and it wasn't very cool to be playing, being a science geek, trying to build a volcano while people outside playing basketball, right? Or doing something like that, right? But I think where I look at this in terms of like the evolution, I do believe like diversity, equity, inclusion to me means, as Anita was saying, seeing people who look like me in the C-suite. Because again, we know whether it's hiring biases or whatever the case is, people hire who they feel comfortable, with, right? And if it's only one, or if it's none, you're never going to get up in there. So I think that if we can kind of change the paradigm, as I spoke to before, where we do see in engineering and in aerospace, we do see some diversity, in there, right? We see it with engineering, we see with some of the various positions, but when it comes to some of those other roles, I think that's where we need to really start to kind of hone in and step in, right? For me, it would be great to be in a meeting and you not have these inner thoughts as to whether or not you actually belong in the room, like you're not, the ideas that you're coming up with, you're not like the only, sometimes. So I think there's some of those transitions in your mind that where you start to have doubts as to kind of what happens. I think making sure that everyone is represented, whether that be through employee resource groups, making sure that there's a voice, making sure that you have aspirational goals. I think those are things that, mean diversity, equity, inclusion, because until you have people in those leadership roles, when it's getting measured, it's getting done. And, if we're just talking about it, we're just talking about it, so I think ultimately for me, the diversity, equity, inclusion piece, to add to what, Russell and Anita said, earlier, I think it's really about representation, at the leadership levels also to make change.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to chime in? No, okay, that's fine. So moving on to the next question, there's a strong business case for diverse teams. I mean, we've seen numerous studies, McKinsey and others have put out studies for years that talks about the tremendous benefits, primarily at the economic level. So there's no doubt that diversity makes good businesses. What benefits have you witnessed firsthand in having a more diverse workforce, both in terms of teams as well as amongst your leaders? Anybody want to chime in on that?
I'll do both sides.
Okay.
The when you don't have diverse teams, how terrible that is, and then when you do have diverse teams, how wonderful that is. And I sadly have witnessed many of my women friends from undergraduate and throughout my career who've left the sector because their companies have been toxic environments and they didn't want to stay and they went and did something else. And so what could be worse than that, right? The environment is so not diverse, so not equitable that you end up leaving because you just can't take it anymore. So that's why you absolutely don't want to have that, is you actually lose your people and then you lose all that, return on investment from having developed those people in your company. So that's one, sort of super negative view. But the positive view, of course, is that you can come up with more diverse solutions, right? I mean, if you had, and I always give this example of like the Matrix with like, the agent, when they all look the same, they're all going to come up with the same solution, right? You have to have people from different walks of life, different economic backgrounds, different genders, different ethnicities to be able to bring new solutions to the table, which is going to come up with a much better product. And then the end user of your product is also going to be diverse. So there's no way you can tap into the needs of your ultimate customer if you don't have a diverse team creating that product for you.
Absolutely. That is so on point. Others want to chime in?
Well, I would say in my experience, I saw from a very big push for diversity, equity, and inclusion at Northrop Grumman that came in. It was hard because that culture was very homogeneous. And so as the diversity hit and started taking hold, we started seeing those new ideas come through and ways of approaching the problem sets and the challenges that we had, whether it be in business development or in the engineering fields. It was really, really interesting to gather the new perspectives and the ways that they approached problems and saw the benefits to that. Sharon, you were talking about that. I saw the difference in some programs where there was these new ideas from underrepresented individuals that were brought in via the inclusion sort of program and push that really did make a difference in making the program successful and moving it forward. So I was really, really happy with it. I would say that what I wasn't happy with, and a little bit to Anita's point of view, is that it takes too long. And it takes too long in a couple of ways that we've already touched on. You need to have some of the foundational education to allow the people to be successful, right? To come in. Because if you just throw somebody in, they may have some brilliant ideas, like Russell says. I was in the military. I saw it from the back row too, from the youngest guys that were in the trenches. They saw what was happening and they could come forward with that. But if you don't have the necessary skills and you come in, you may miss some of the fundamental points that are necessary to make a solution, right? And so I would hope that along with this equity and inclusion, there's this groundswell of let's find ways to give those people those foundational talents and skills.
So let me add to that, Bill. I really like what you were saying about that representation piece and whatnot. And I think that some of the benefits that I've seen, whether it be within this industry and external, is when you have a diverse team, people want to know what's going on in that team, right? Like you get invitations to events and to organizations that maybe you would not have gotten, before. Like if you're active on LinkedIn, if you're active on social media, people start tapping in to see what it is that you're talking about, and they want to listen. Because at that point, when they see what they want to be, when there's representation there, it no longer is performative, meaning we're not just changing, profiles for Black History Month or, for Pride Month, like they actually see it. I think that ends up being important because I think ultimately that helps out the employee value proposition. Employees who are with the organization want to stay with the organization, and they don't mind telling other people who look like them to come on board. And then I think people externally, they want to be a part of that. So I think, what I've seen in terms of the benefits is that employee value proposition internally and externally is really increased. I also think that, again, from a representation standpoint, people feel like I can achieve my career aspirations or goals by coming on board to this organization because I see someone who looks like me or someone who might share a similar background or upbringing to me. So I think those are some of like the unwritten, benefits that we tend to see, and I've been able to witness those personally.
Yeah, and I'll hop in there, and I know Sharon, I'll let you move to the next question. Anita did mention that having representation in the C-suite, that changed my career going forward. Every step, particularly when I was in my younger career, going into different companies and seeing someone of color, somebody who looked like me in a position of power, that definitely laid the groundwork for giving me a model of possibility. So I could see someone doing the job that I wanted to do, somebody looking like me who's doing it, made it so much easier for me to visualize getting there.
I want to, and this may sound odd, but I think that having that upper C-suite diversity in all different areas makes everybody down below in the organization work harder. And I saw that. It made the white man work harder because he knew he had strong competition in the areas, whether it be from a woman that was beside him that was very good, or from, a diverse talent pool is what I'm saying. But when you see that you have that path going up, everybody works harder to get there if they have those aspirations, right? And so it's not just, it not only benefits the diverse talent pool, but the legacy talent pool, I'll call it, right?
Absolutely. So before we move off this topic, what I like is how you all have framed this around why it makes a difference and how it makes a difference. I want to add one additional piece of context. So starting with the comment that I made about the profitability of companies that are more diverse tend to sway higher than those that are non. Here's a perfect example of what it means when you get your product to market. I won't mention the manufacturer, but it is a current, very popular drone manufacturer, produced a controller to go with their drone. And evidently, all of their engineers and all their testing was done on men. Well, when that product hit the market, the controller was too large for, let's just say, the average woman's hands. And no one ever asked us or came to anyone, and female evidently, and asked our opinion or input. So the conversation within the female market, behind the scenes, underground, however you want to call it, was like, I tested this product, but the controller is too hard to manipulate because the sticks were in a different position because it was too large. And a female journalist who did a review said, you know what, a great product, but I would never buy it because the controller doesn't fit. So just think about if they had even tested it with women or got our input, it probably would have.
You are bringing up something that hit very close to home for me as a pilot in the military. My daughter was a C-130 pilot in the Marine Corps, and she went over to Afghanistan and had to fly. There were 2 points. They never made that airplane for a woman. No. Because I don't know if it was all men that were designing it, or they said, well, the mission will never be flown by women. Well, that's silly, but the 2 points, when she sat at the controls, her legs were so short, they couldn't make the rudder pedals reach them. So she had to fly 10-hour missions on a book with a book behind her in a seat that was, the rest of the seat was over there. So she was constantly hunched over. And to be even more personal about it, she could not use the restroom on it. There was a curtain that could close around, but the privacy for that type of a thing on that airplane forced her to be very uncomfortable on many flights, is what she told me. And right. So it's interesting you bring up the physical natures of what they are designing needs that interpretation, but there's also the cultural parts that I think, and I'd love to hear any vignettes about that, because I think that's just as important. And I'd like to maybe come back to that later as far as what we need in the AAM industry and why we need it.
Well, you know what, Bill? Let's go ahead and go down that rabbit hole. Go ahead and take us there.
Well, as I start thinking about the future for AAM and what it is planned to be a part of, you start talking about the the Uber Elevate white paper back in 16 said it's going to democratize particularly urban transportation and allow them to use the third dimension, and them being the whole populace. The same people that are in cabs and in buses and in trains are going to be able to use this new medium because it's going to be cheap enough for them. Okay. Well, if you don't have people in the full system being part of it, whether it be understanding the locations that you need to fly out of, the routes that you're going to take, the urban planning that you need, if you don't have the people that are in those areas, and I'm talking about the workers that come from the hard part of town, right, that take the bus, if they aren't talking to the folks, then there will be this total disconnect from the absolute customers that you're trying to get to. As you look at the regional air mobility part of it, where you're looking out at maybe the underutilized airports that are in far-flung parts of the country that you could perhaps pick up new passenger sets because you have this cost-effective means of getting out there. If you're not talking to the farmer that needs somebody to come out to fix his tractors or something like that, then you have no idea what are the tools that guy's going to have to carry out there. What are the things that he's going to have? And then the people at the airports, what type of processing are you going to need for the different clientele that are going to come through? I hope I'm coming through with that, the idea that diversity has to be part of this new urban and regional air mobility, and the idea of where do you use the UAVs and how are they going to be accepted by different cultures and different folks that are going to be impacted by the use of them. So I think it's so important to start out and to include diversity in this to make it successful, to make AAM successful.
So Bill, what I like about what you just said is that for our audience, again, the HR leaders that are here, you're helping them paint the broader picture that this is not a task of what do we need in terms of engineers and other marketing people, but they need to look more holistically. So there has to be a strategic approach to hiring, and that is very broad and understanding the entire value chain for that organization. And as someone else said, I think it was Anita, it starts at the top. This is about leadership. This is about what do we need holistically. So we need HR to really see this as they need to be part of the strategic effort of driving the right skills, the right people, and having the right folks at the table in terms of the opportunities within their organization.
And I can give you a really funny anecdote, which is not really an anecdote. It's actually a discipline of engineering, is systems engineering. And for systems engineering, you start at the top with your customer requirements, which could be a government customer, it could be an individual user. And then you work that way down to be able to get down to the ultimate component level designing your system. And so when you're designing a payload for the International Space Station, which is one of my last roles when I was at NASA, you get this 1,000-page document of all these requirements for the International Space Station, but a lot of them had to do with human factors. And they had already taken into account the 99% female and the 1% female, the 99% male and the 1% male, so that whatever you did when it came to human interactions had to take into account the size of people's hands, right? If someone could actually be able to reach into there. So the idea of taking into account the needs of other people should be built into our engineering process. And the fact that it isn't in many areas goes to show that there's something wrong with the people who are making the decisions, right? Who are setting up that engineering framework, that framework altogether for the company, because it actually should be considered. And I think it's funny because the International Space Station obviously was meant to be an international laboratory, and they automatically built that into the design of the things that were going in there to the best that they could, right? So, but I just think that's an interesting aside.
Oh, I'll hop in there, because to that point, and you guys might not be aware, and I literally just heard the results of this survey. So NASA did commission, your former employer, Anita, NASA did commission a survey on vertiport locations in metropolitan areas. So NASA is behind the scenes working on figuring out what those human factors are around AAM. So they I asked the question of the guy creating the survey. They did account for all demographic related information in the survey. The survey was around 30 to 45 minutes long. So they checked every box, and that comprehensive data from that survey effort is available publicly. But to answer the question, Bill, NASA has been behind the scenes working on determining what those diversity things need to look like on AAM side, but it's a slow walk.
And when it's just a survey of the culture, that's not the same as having somebody in the top suite that is thinking about all those things, whether it be the urban planner or it be the HR rep or the media rep or the marketing guy or lady that is going to get public acceptance, which is so critical to this market. So I like your point that they are taking it into account. They know that they need to have an understanding of the different diverse points of view, but you have to institutionalize it inside the companies. And I think it was Ricky saying, we're just starting into this. Why can't we grab it now and make it part of the fundamentals of each of the companies that are going forward? And maybe Anita, you're in the middle of being one of the companies that is driving this, and so is Ricky. But how do you think we're going to be able to grab that diverse talent pool and put them into the right spots and promote them to be the leaders in this?
Well, I mean, as the CEO, and my company's still small, I can actively hire on that front. So it's actually one of the reasons why I became an entrepreneur, is that I actually could create a diverse aerospace company. So we already have a diverse leadership. We already have a diverse advisory board, and we're now building up our actual board of directors, and that will also be diverse. So for me, it was easy because I was the one who was able to say, this is going to happen because it needs to happen, to make a point for everybody else. But I think the other part too is just accessibility. And so accessibility can have related with people who have limited abilities in some way, but also based off of people's financial situation. And when you look at in the United States, there's going to be a range of different economic types, which sometimes does correlate with people who are of different ethnicities. And so if you don't make accessibility at the core of your product offering, which is so important for aviation, you are just going to eliminate people from using your product altogether and really upset people, and maybe even get yourself canceled on social media.
Right. So, we've gone down several of the questions. I should say we've covered several of the questions that I was going to ask next, but I want to take a step back. Again, our audience are HR leaders. How can we be different? How can eVTOL and advanced air mobility be different? What do we need to start doing, particularly from a hiring standpoint? I mean, we've given some examples of realistic of what's going on and what can be done. But what are some things that HR leaders can do, or what steps have you seen them take already, if your company's already doing this, to close the gap in diversity?
I can speak to that. One of the things that we care.
Uh-oh, I think we may have lost Russell there briefly.
Or Aerospace 3.0 presents a
I'm sorry,
tremendous
Russell,
opportunity.
Russell, you were frozen there, so we missed a good portion of what you were just stating. Can you start over with that?
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
We fashion AAM as Aviation 3.0, and it's a tremendous opportunity to do, as far as this is a knock on companies like Wisk or Joby and whatnot, but the way the industry is, has kind of taken off, it's very, okay. It's about, get in first and control it. Okay. But a lot of these companies that, they want to be vertically integrated, but that's not going to happen in this sector because of the multidisciplinary aspect of it. And one of the things that we're trying to do is create some unity of effort across all the different silos and, within the sector. The aircraft manufacturers are doing, and who don't know what the command and control people are doing, at some point it's going to get out of kilter. Okay. So being able to to bring, fresh, new ideas in, and particularly downstream, because I think most of us, are, Gen X and whatnot, we kind of grew up with the space shuttle launches and whatnot, and that kind of cultivated our passion and interest in the industry. Kids don't have that today, and like Ernest said earlier, they've got so many different options, aerospace, okay, it's just, okay, what's so cool, so, we have to ignite that interest passion early. And I'm talking about 8, 9, 10 years old, and have the, a vehicle in place to cultivate that moving up. And there are some like Civil Air Patrol and whatnot, but, most people don't know about those, those kind of things. And, for me, I can't imagine who couldn't get excited about flying cars. Okay. So I think as an industry, whether it's a trade organization or whatnot, we've got to start, trumpeting the societal benefits of, of AAM, and, and getting the culture excited, and, looking forward to, to the evolution of it.
Right. So what I think you've brought to us is an alignment around some of the earlier conversation that we need to fuel that pipeline earlier. And for our HR leaders that are in the audience, they're going to be hearing this, maybe we should also offer, where should they be looking today? Where do you think they're not looking today that we want to make sure that they start to consider as they need to hire more diversity, if nothing else, because you know what, there's a need today, and that need is just going to continue to grow. I mean, there's already studies that show that there's, over the next few years, we're short 10,000 engineers alone. So where should our HR leaders be looking today that maybe they may not be looking today? Bill, you had your hand up. I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm going to go back just a little bit to what Russell was saying, and then maybe we can fold in where do they need to go, because I'm trying to give some action-oriented ideas to the HR leaders that are out there that we're trying to speak to. One of them, it occurred to me that HR needs to take on more than just finding the right person. We alluded to this, but also providing ways for those underprivileged or under promoted individuals to move forward. And I'm wondering, couldn't they be more like a high school counselor mindset, where you show them the path that they need to take, you then give them a listing of, here are the ways that you can get funding, connect them to the different grants that are out there that they may need, connect them to the different universities that have the right type of syllabus that they need and that are affordable. So how do you have this in your background as you're going around to that talent pool that you're trying to reach into to build over the years? I know it's going to take that long, but it's not just about getting the talent pool that is already has all the background skills, and I keep going back to that, but then where is it that they need to go to? That's your question, right, Sharon? I would say that it goes to, and perhaps the surveys are out there, what population has not yet, what cultural population, what population in different ethnicities and economic positions have not yet been tapped into the STEM programs, who are underrepresented. I think we know that, right? So that you just reverse engineer it and go back and look for that population, because we know that the population's there. And so that's where I would say they have to do that sort of research and work backwards.
So I'm going to turn to Ernest, because I'm surprised that he hasn't chimed in here. Where should they be looking that they're not looking today, based on what we kind of sort of know?
And I was going to let the folks in. I wanted to hear Ricky's perspective, because he's primarily in HR. But from my perspective as a hiring manager, and I've noticed, I've been caught in this trap as well. We tend to when we're looking for a position, we need that position filled quickly. We really almost always rely on our networks to fill the position. What we're going to need to do for workforce development, particularly in the space, we got to do a better job of marketing these opportunities to folks outside of our network. And in particular, that what that means for most of folks, you got to start marketing these opportunities to folks and students in HBCUs, other minority communities. You got to tap into these community organizations. So if you want to hire a Black engineer, why aren't you involved with NSBE at all? You should know what they're doing. That's a primary, you get access to their entire Black book of network, that you can find tons of Black engineers on the market via that. Connect with HBCUs now so that they're prepared to fulfill job positions in the future. So that from an academic perspective, they're teaching the kids the skills they need to know to fulfill your jobs. Because currently, without interaction from industry, those schools don't have the resources to get those students what they need. And then I'll speak another, and I know Bill mentioned this earlier. I'm gonna speak from a cultural perspective as a Black guy, a Black man in this country. Most of our journeys, and I did a blog post on this a few years ago, from my understanding from folks, are individual. Most of us, in particular in STEM, we find our way through our careers, not network. We don't have much of a network. We're finding our way alone. We're figuring it out alone, and we develop our network probably later in our career. I'm really getting to my network now, and I'm just about to turn 40. So HR, workforce development folks, help folks with their network, tap into these communities immediately, do it now, do it before they're even aware that you're coming. That's the best way to get us in the pipeline.
So
Hey,
before we move on, Ricky, before you move on, I just want to just for our audience clarify, because you use several acronyms there, that let's not assume that the audience know what a HBCU is. Historically,
Historically Black college, university, or college or university. That's what a HBCU is. NSBE is national. Somebody help me with that.
Association of Black Engineers. Yep.
There you go.
Yep.
yeah. So go ahead, Ricky.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think these are like just some outstanding points. And I think that, you know, for the HR listeners, the practitioners that are listening right now, it's one thing to always remember, as an HR professional, we are enablers, you know, to the business, right? We enable leaders to be able to achieve what they need to achieve, whether that be talent, whether that be, you know, with hiring and staffing numbers. We are enablers. We don't actually own the business. We help the business thrive. So when I think about that, it's kind of two-pronged. And so Sharon, just give me the look when I've said enough, okay? But I mean, I think it starts like at a very, very young age. And I remember Anita sharing a story about when she was young and, you know, had aspirations to want to do something and didn't see, you know, someone that looked like her, or was told like maybe she couldn't really do some of that, and it fueled her. So I think that really, as an HR practitioner, I think we have to find opportunities for our organizations to tap into that young environment. So for example, at WISC, we're starting a project with the social engineering project, where we're taking underrepresented kids at a very young age, and there's a STEM program, you know, they're forming. We're showing them, hey, this is what we do at WISC. This is what eVTOL is. This is what, so again, it's that eye-opening thing. I think we all remember being in assemblies or field trips when we would see someone come in and do a show and telling you, you're going back home and you're excited, telling your parents, you know, about that. We're kind of trying to tap in to it at that level, because that's the young, you know, talent. So I'm using the social engineering project as an example, because as an HR practitioner and you're enabling the business, you got to go out there and do the work and find organizations, whether that be, you know, women's organizations, young girl camps, whatever it is, you got to find those. I think the second part of this is in the high schools, and whether it's internship programs in college, being able to tap into those internships and being extremely intentional about the interns of the high school kids that you're trying to tap into. We know if it's 80% men and 20% women in aerospace, then why in the heck aren't your interns, you know, the opposite of that? Why aren't you really trying to make sure that it's 70%, female and 30%, male, right? Because you're trying to like balance, that. But I think that's the intentionality that, we have to be able to try to do at the high school and the college. I think that, and to Ernest's point, I think that, making sure that you have internship programs, that have the science and women engineers, otherwise known as SWE, the Hispanic Serving Institutions, HSIs, and the HBCUs, because traditionally, and not to disregard anyone else, but if you double click on that ethnic diversity, number, if you just look at who are the engineers that are coming out of college, they don't tend to look like me. They don't tend to look like people who have a lot of melanin in their skin. It's not the female, engineers that are getting all of the opportunities. So that's why we have to have that intentionality and have aspirational goals around creating the talent or cultivating the talent. I believe, like, as Ernest, we've heard Russell say it, Bill, like everyone has said it, in terms of cultivating that talent. But I think the other part of this is, and now not just doing those programs, because it does end up being a bit, it does end up being a little bit like show if you do not hire. And the way that you hire some of those individuals is you have to have relationships with all of those alumni associations. That needs to be a bit of a hiring pool, for you. So I think we have the formula, we have the resources out there. It really is about making this part of your DNA and actually doing it. So I think that because we are new, and this was part of the intrigue, that brought me to this industry, and call it stupidity, if you like, but I really feel like we have an opportunity as HR professionals to really change, history here. We can change how things work, and you can look yourself in the mirror and say, I'm proud to be in this industry, and these are the concrete things that I'm doing to change it. Because it's easy to slip into, everything that's happened in the past and keep hiring who we've hired before, or keep having things look the way that they look today. But for the HR listeners, the HR practitioners out there today, if you really want to be a good enabler to your business, you got to do this work, that we're talking about right now.
Now, on that note, the careers that are going to exist in this sector have yet to be developed. I mean, and Ricky can speak to this. 2 years ago, many of the careers that they're advertising that, as far as that they need, didn't exist. Like battery capacity engineer, air mobility systems engineer. Those are careers that have just been developed over the past, year or so. As the industry has matured. And we spoke earlier about we need 10,000 engineers. Well, those 10,000 engineers, are going to be required to have skill sets much greater than just a traditional, aeronautical engineering skill set. They're going to need to be, much more multidisciplinary than the past. So, and I know Anita, you're working with students. We kind of focus on, developing, doing as much as possible to lay the foundation, so that they're future-proof, future-proof skill sets, and that they're able to move, laterally, as the needs arises. So, Wayne, why are you such a hockey player? And he would always answer, well, because I go to where the puck is going to be, not where it is.
Right. Absolutely. Go ahead,
And I hop in. And this is one thing, we're talking about the equity, diversity, and inclusion. And Anita did mention earlier, accessibility. And Sharon, you mentioned in Excel, that's something we never really consider. And that's something I never consider, even in my outreach. Something I need to do better is
talking workforce development more
on the accessibility side. I need to understand what applications folks can use in this industry, what jobs folks can do in this industry from an application perspective. I think all of us need to, because we typically think of this stuff on the color, gender line, where those other folks aren't considered, and we got to do a better job of that as well.
Yeah. So I think what you all have offered up, I shouldn't say I think, what you all have offered up are some really concrete approaches that the HR audience out there can take away from what's possible and what they need to consider. But I think the overarching element of the conversation thus far has really been about this is a new industry, and they're at a great intersection of really being able to say, what are we going to do differently to build out this new industry? And you all have offered several suggestions. Each of you have offered suggestions in terms of that approach. So, just a few more questions. This has been a great conversation and I want to continue it, but I want to make sure that everyone has a chance to really speak to specific initiatives that you may have within your organization. A couple of you have touched upon it, around programs that you would say, you know what, Mr. or Miss HR executive out there listening in, here's one or two more ideas that you should consider, or some examples that you've seen that work at other organizations. And I'll give you one. I know that the tech side of the industry or tech industry have started partnering with high schools to start 6-year programs and say, you know what, take them through the first 4 and then we'll pay for 2 more to basically develop that tech skill that we need, because the universities aren't doing what we need fast enough. They're not coming out with the skills. So what are some other thoughts that you may have around ideas that either you're implementing in your company or others that you know of, whether they're the recruiting, like we just spoke about, several of you just spoke about, or other ideas, creating an advisory board of people that don't look like their current leadership to give them that input. Thoughts? Anyone want to jump in on that?
I'll hop in there, Sharon. So one of the big things working on the government side of the house is there are a lot of government related contracts coming out where planning funds are denoted, where they have DBE percentages that are provided. So for example, if you get a government contract here in North Texas, I think our current DBE percentage is around 32%, which means 32% of that contract has to be allocated to a disenfranchised business enterprise or minority owned business or something to that end. Problem is, on this advanced air mobility side, is we don't have enough minority or diverse owned companies working in the space. So something I've been doing on the side is I put together a community group, building up a network of these particular organizations, educating on them what's to come in AAM so they can start to develop the skill set to start to fulfill these government contracts. So when you have a prime contractor like a Jacobs Engineering or somebody like that come in and they need a DBE firm to work with on these new contracts with new money out there, we have these DBE firms who can actually fulfill them. And I think that's something that should be going on around the country. I know some primes have real good relationships with their subcontractors. Every prime who's working in this space, a prime contractor working in this space, should have a program around advanced air mobility with their DBE subcontractors.
That's a great example of the opportunities and what the companies can do. Anyone else have some ideas they want to share that are concrete that an HR leader that's watching this or going to receive the report from this can take away?
I think people should try and set quantitative metrics, not just qualitative metrics, because if you don't set a number to try to achieve, then you can always say, well, we've done better than we did last year. So I think you need to pick a number like that, like whether that's 25%, 30%, but it's got to be well above 10%, that's for sure. And the reason why I bring that up is that I just filled out my women-owned business certification, and I don't know if this is supposed to be a sales pitch for such a good job the government is doing, but it was like, we give 5% of federal contracts to women-owned companies. I'm like, that's terrible. 5%, right? And they don't even have a program for specifically minority-owned businesses. So yeah, I think we need to set hard targets from the top down that the executives are held to if they don't achieve them, in terms of definitely the leadership area. So it has to be in the pipeline area. Also should be funding that the company provides to STEM programs in underserved communities, as well as hiring targets of, I would say 30% for gender and ethnic diversity.
I like that, Anita. And I think that one of the critical areas where I learned early on in my career, and I think we said it before, was what gets measured gets accomplished, right? So I think that really helps. I think one more concrete, area is what I've done. And I had a great leader, show me how this works is, now this is probably not going to be popular to a lot of individuals, because when someone tells you that they're getting ready to hire or they need someone, it's yesterday, most times, right? But if you can do the demand planning and plan out when you're going to have these openings, you can engage those relationships with the institutions that we spoke to earlier in those alumni associations. But I think specifically requiring more people in the pipeline, more ethnic diversity and gender diversity in the pipeline. So what we've instituted is for every open role, where it makes sense, we want to be able to have, 50% women, in the pipeline for those roles. And we want to have 25% ethnic diversity, for those roles. So it kind of takes the excuse, away a little bit of I can't find the talent. The position may last, but maybe open a little bit longer if you've waited to the last minute to start recruiting. But that really solely rests with the HR practitioners again, because staffing and recruiting is the ones who's out there mining for talent. They're out there being the talent scouts. So you have to bring people to the table so that your managers, can start to interview and be able to influence that. And again, that is at the line level. I do think that at the board level and at the C-suite level, we do need to be intentional about filling those roles. So it's not like moving icebergs to try to get ethnically diverse or gender diverse individuals in the pipeline. But I do think that's a concrete, way of trying to influence, and building on what Anita said is having a metric, that you're chasing for.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in metrics. And I think the other thing that it helps us do as an industry is that it starts to separate that conversation around diversity counts and gets us more into the inclusion count, right? Because we really need to understand that the two are not interchangeable, but in fact, you need to have a process in place that makes sure that employees, as well as executives, feel inclusive, and that you're not hiring for having that one representative. And that's important that at all levels, because they'll quickly get into, oh, well, we've hired 5 managers. Well, if they're all entry-level managers or middle managers and the upper echelons of the organization haven't changed, then you really haven't made change, and you're not making inroads to make change. Or if you only have that one representative. So I think you all make some great points. And that goes for both all types of diversity, accessibility, and so forth. So as we start to wrap up our conversation, I think what we've landed on is that progress is only going to be as robust as the dedication to it. And that dedication has to start at the top. There needs to be clear alignment and ownership at the top of the organization, as well as a commitment to really changing it, because we are starting a new industry in many ways. And if the leadership at the top doesn't understand that, then that message doesn't really flow, and the HR individuals are back to just hiring for counts. So as we wrap up this piece, I'd like to hear from each of you all. What is your vision or your goal for the industry regarding DEI? At some point in the future, you can define that point in the future, and whoever wants to start off can take us there. So what is your vision or end goal for the industry over the next few years?
I'll kick that off.
No, I got it, Russell.
Go ahead, Ernest.
Okay. So from my perspective, my goal, in particular 2022 and beyond, is to ensure that I get eyes on the subject of every community from an accessibility and diversity perspective. So I'm gonna do outreach to minority communities. I'm gonna try to find folks in the hearing impaired community, the vision impaired community, the infirmed communities, explaining to them what this industry is, because I think that's those are the discussions that need to start happening, even for this industry to take off the way they're anticipating. And I understand the issues that current industry, in particular, the WISCs, the Jobies, are having with community outreach. They're just trying to get their aircraft certified, right? They don't have the bandwidth currently to do so. So the onus is on folks like us who want to see the technology thrive to get eyes on the prize.
Russell?
Yeah, we're not just gonna, even though we actively promote the sector, we intend to engage at a very deep level in the implementation of the tools, the education and training necessary to underserved community to take part in this sector. It's not often that you get an opportunity to to see an industry grow from the ground, from its beginning, from the ground up. And this is an opportunity of opportunity. And we in order for it to, the benefits are far reaching, as far as the potential and ability to serve greater humanity. So so we are going to be over the next year heavily engaged in particularly with HBCUs, tribal university college, in making them aware of this emerging sector and assisting them in adapting their curriculums to take advantage of it.
Thank you. Other panelists want to chime in? What are your vision and or goals for the industry over the next few years as it relates to DEI?
So I
think Bill, you go first.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Anita. I seem to be jumping in too often here, but
Oh, no.
I would love to see I think I key on what Anita said about let's put that metric of 30%, up there at least, if not more, as I do assessments of companies with my company, that I start to find the diversity in the companies are at the 30% level, and that would happen fairly quickly because we have the opportunity to make it happen quickly. And so I am saying that because back to my original comment of I'd love to have the companies reflect the customer base that they're serving, because I believe that allows them to understand and better reap the benefits from an economic point of view. Their company will thrive because they know their customer base better, because they have all the inputs from the same style of people, if you will, that are going to be using their product. To your point, Anita, about having somebody that at least, or Sharon, has the controller in their hand while it's being produced. They would have been better served to have that diversity there. The last part that and again, I go back a little bit to what I was trying to get to, is I would love to see partnerships back down the manpower chain, back into that middle school and high school arena, where the companies are providing resources for underserved communities that will then get them through the STEM requirements. So small scholarships to things like the Huntsville Aviation Academy or to Space Camp or things like that aren't that expensive, and they may be able to make partnerships with existing charities or existing organizations that do those type of scholarships. I'm on a board of a organization, a charitable organization that does those type of scholarships. And so if you could connect and find those people, and that's where I said the HR reps need to be a little bit like a high school counselor, right? Find those granting places, find the educational sources and the ability to underpin a person that wants to do this. You excite them, and then you give them the actual tools to go out and make their way along the path. That's what I'd like to see. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you. Anita?
So I would like for there to be a huge shift in the sort of the diversity of incoming student groups. And so I've been saddened to see year after year of students coming into, my undergraduate class where there's no diversity whatsoever. And it really saddens me. It really upsets me that it hasn't really changed in my, 13 years of teaching. So I would like to see 50% diversity, if not more, in all of engineering programs across the country and every school, which means that universities need to make much more focus on this as well, not just the general population coming in, but in STEM programs, they really need to strive for 50%, ethnic gender diversity at a minimum, right? Because we've seen, at least from a woman perspective in medical school, it went from like 10%, now it's at like 50% or even 60% incoming classes women, which is fantastic, which means somebody clearly made that an emphasis. And then I would also like to see in the aerospace industry 50%, gender and ethnic diversity. When I see people attending conferences, I just wanted it to reflect the society that we live in, right? The global society that we live in, and that has to happen because each one of us, at every stage of our career, in any way we interact with other people, are making that a priority. And I think when that is the conversation, it will happen.
Yeah, look,
And Ricky?
so I'm just inspired just to hear people's visions and goals. And I think that ultimately for me, I mean, we have an amazing opportunity, regardless of what field you're in, and whatnot, what function you're in. We have an amazing opportunity to really, really shape something from the ground up, here. Take everything that we've seen that was wrong and just do it right. Like, it really is not that difficult, right? So what I hope to see is everything that everyone else, said, but I really want this to be part of our DNA. Like the conversations that you're having, that we're having right now, and Sharon, that you're doing an amazing job, hosting, is commonplace. This is what we have to have, but we have to have it with other people who make the decisions to make this be easy. So all they have to do is walk through the door and just do it. Like, this is not, let me gather some more research, let me figure some things out. This is not that. We have all of the research. This is the first plane wasn't just built, right? Like all of that stuff, like we know what we need to do. And so what I'm hoping for, in the next few years, is that we just stop talking about it, that we stop making this be performative, and we start building on some very serious goals, that we attain those. So again, this just needs to be in the DNA, and we need to stop talking about it. So what I'm looking for is action. And I think that all of us, on this panel, we can look to each other, be part of our community of practice. But again, what I'm looking for is the HR leaders out there to really understand the power and the opportunity that you have to really influence something that really hasn't happened the way that we wanted it to. You have the power to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, I put it all out there, and I'm doing what I can to influence. And that's what I'm hoping we see over the next, few years in this, that it is sustained success, at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I would concur with all of your comments, and the few additional sound bites that I would add to it is that, particularly because this is something that I really believe organizations can do over the next couple of years, is I would like to see more diversity on these boards in the industry, because it doesn't require that they have to find new talent. This is a current, there are women, there are men, there are minorities out there. There are allies, just like Bill is stepping up and really adding and contributing to the conversation here, who firmly believe that the industry would be better. There is no reason why boards of directors, VC funding, and advisory boards cannot be more diverse over the next 24 to 36 months. And I would challenge HR leaders as champions of diversity, equity, inclusion, that if they really want to make a difference, that they press their leadership to make sure that at the top levels, that they bring in more diversity, because that's when you will start seeing a difference throughout the organization. That piece will be smaller throughout the organization, but slower, just because the pipelines is small, as well as the competition is fierce for talent. But the boardroom piece and the leadership piece can easily be accomplished in the next 24 to 36 months. So you know what? I want to thank all of you all today. Bill, were you about to chime in? I thought I saw you turn your mic off. No? Okay. Any final comments from our panelists?
I just want to say thank you. Like, I honestly, Sharon, thank you for giving us an opportunity and a platform to be able to be authentic, and to be able to speak to, some solutions that we believe can move the needle, here. So I just want to say thank you for having us all on, and it's been a pleasure.
Sharon, and if we need to edit this out because it may seem a little bit non-PC, is that me, as the only white old guy on this panel. I now have a much greater appreciation for what each one of you have gone through when you walk into a room and you say, man, what am I doing here? It really brings it home, and I absolutely appreciate it. It's changed me already. It's made me think about the way that I'm going to look at my company and the way that I'm going to look at the industry. To your point, Ricky, we need to be pushing for that 24 or 36 month change because we can do that. So thanks.
You're welcome.
Yes, and thank you everyone as well. I learned so much today. And Sharon, thank you for your leadership. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. So with that, I'd like to thank our panelists for their time today, for your honesty, your commitment, and more importantly, your commitment to change. I think as change leaders that you all will make a difference, and as HR champions, listen and hear what you've had to say. Hopefully they take to heart, and this will help them create a better industry in terms of their efforts.